Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk about ChatGPT, Part 2. Last week, we gave Demetrius a challenge, and the challenge was to go and use ChatGPT from the perspective of being a researcher and to kind of push it and try to break it and just kind of get a good 360 experience with it and then bring that experience back to us. But before we get started on that, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened over the last couple of days, and we'll go from there. All right. Hey, D, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I've got a whole page of notes from my ChatGPT experience for the first time.
That's awesome. So a couple of things that actually happened last week and a few things that happened this week that are really interesting is, I don't know, did you hear about what happened at Google AI Day?
I did not. Did they have some kind of high, like blue screen or something?
It reminds me of that blue screen of death that happened to Bill Gates back in the 90s. I think it was 90s or early 2000s. It wasn't as bad as that. Personally, I didn't see it as like a huge deal, but the market did. So what happened is they were doing their AI day and they showed their demonstration of it, which is kind of their competitor to ChatGPT, and it's called Bard. And they asked it a question about the James Webb Telescope, and then it provided an answer, but the answer was one that was not correct. It was basically information that was pulled from a different telescope. So it basically showed that the information that the AI provided was wrong. And the question that was asked is something that, a kid in school would ask it and then maybe use that for one of their, research studies or something like that in class. And the minute that happened, their stock tanked by 10%. It is directly correlated with the event. And I've been doing a lot of reading about this, and what they're saying is they believe the reason why it tanked at that time was because everyone was a little bit concerned that Google was behind, even though they can't be behind. They've been doing this stuff forever, like this AI stuff. They just haven't really brought it to the front, like they are right now. But that Google jumped in and said, oh, we have to do an AI day. We got to compete with OpenAI because it's getting so much attention. And then they go and they do this, and it kind of flops, and it basically shows that Google's kind of behind the curve, and that Microsoft and ChatGPT are basically ahead of the curve. And so it kind of concerned the.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know that they're behind the curve.
Well, I'm not saying that
we'll get to that when we get to my notes on ChatGPT.
I'm just telling you the news. I'm not telling you what I believe.
Yeah.
I
get it. But I mean, what I usually do here is respond to not what you're telling me per se, but what people are doing in response to some tech news. And I think it's an overreaction if an AI got something wrong, I mean, they should be built into your understanding that they're developing an AI, right? It's not going to be like, the AI from the movie Her anytime soon.
Yeah, I think what it was is just a comparison. Like, I think you assume that they're going to get it better. Like in your mind, you're like, Google will do it better than the startup. And then suddenly the startup is visually better. Let's say, there's a lot details or whatever that you want to explain, but like there's visually better. People are enjoying it. I should say people are enjoying it more. And then they see this one and it makes these mistakes, and it's kind of like, oh no. Right.
Yeah.
And the market responds that way about lots of things, and then it bounces back, and I'm sure it's bounced back today. But it definitely is a sign to me, just a little bit of a trigger sign that, that we really are starting to get more sensitive to artificial intelligence as the next technology to keep your eye on.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things I take from that. Number one is that for the most part, there are certainly some counter examples, but for the most part, investors and institutional investors aren't tech people. They don't necessarily understand how the development works, how the demos work, any of that kind of things. And I don't think they really understand the limitations of ChatGPT at this point in time. And the second is that we're kind of at the technology is very feasible. It has a very strong future. It's going to be huge, but we're also kind of at the knee jerk level of it from an investor standpoint, and probably from a social standpoint, of it's just kind of taking on a life of its own. It's the hype, basically. The same kind of thing happened with crypto. and and with AI and with drones and those kinds of things. And it's one of the things I think is detrimental to like the progress of technology in general too.
Yeah, we see that a lot. There was another release this week that I wanted to mention because it kind of ties into this, which was GitHub. So
Mm-hmm.
GitHub launched Copilot, which is an AI tool based on OpenAI's Codex. And the Codex is what they use in order to suggest code in OpenAI. Well,
Mm-hmm.
for the GitHub version, it basically suggests code and entire functions in real time for $19 a month. And
Nice.
I talked to a programmer friend of ours, and they said it works pretty well. So it's basically suggesting the code. It's not like writing it for you, but it's basically saying like, okay, I suggest that you write this. And then you're kind of just looking at it saying like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. And you can cut and paste it or bring it in or
Yeah.
whatever. We're getting to that point where it's like, you don't have to write everything from scratch anymore.
Well, I mean, almost nobody writes from scratch. So, and anybody out there who doesn't work with coders, the way that most coding is done these days is people will go out and find some code that's very similar. They'll cut and paste it, and then they'll make modifications until it fits. But it's pretty rare these days that you code something absolutely from scratch.
Exactly. And this kind of ties in a little bit to your prediction that we talked about last week. And also, you talked about a couple of years ago, I think when we first started the podcast, which is that we are going to get to the point where like a lot of this basic code that's necessary, whether it be front end stuff or basic batch scriptings or, whatever it is just not going to be generated by humans anymore. Like there's enough of it out there that you should be able to just quickly grab it, use it, modify it, that kind of stuff. And hopefully to a point where you can just use real language and just say, write me a script that does X, Y, Z, like you can on ChatGPT. And then it'll actually write the code for you and you can just take a look at it. I think that's what
Yeah,
we're getting.
we said this last week, but I do think this where I don't think it's going to be transformative for coding across the board, but where it will be a little bit more applied and more kind of plug and play are some of the front end interface kind of things, or like fairly simple websites that only just have a few buttons or some hyperlinks and stuff. You can just for somebody who's doing like a personal website or something like that,
Mhm.
that could very soon be fully automated.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, I was listening to an interview between Kara Swisher and I forgot who they were talking to. And one of the things that they were saying in there about ChatGPT is like a lot of people are also kind of looking at it from the perspective of how does this compare to search? And if you look at like Google search, for example, you type something into search, you get some good results, but you also get ads, and then you got to go through those results, and then you got to cut them and paste them, blah, blah, blah. Is that if you just looked at like ChatGPT and said, okay, let's assume it's right 70% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if 70% of the time you're kind of getting what you want and it's 3 times quicker than a general search, you could see now where search will probably go. It'll probably go to a point where it goes, okay, here's what we think the answer is, and then here's what is out there in the world from a bunch of other sources, and you make the choice of how you want to piece this together or how you want to do this. And then eventually providing sources on the AI generated content for everything that's distributed. Because she made a good point. She said, as a reporter, right? She's like, if you tell me, like, if you asked it historically, what has the stock market done over the last 100 years or something, right? And then it gives you that information really quickly. You need a source for that information because it could be
Mm-hmm.
incorrect, right? So that has
Yeah.
to be tied back to something that is reputable and makes sense and people trust.
Yeah, I think that's a great use case is kind of the background research that's involved with like writing just about anything, of gathering your sources and checking them and making sure that and getting all the information in place. If somebody's writing a news article, somebody's writing even a novel, and they want to know about, tell me about, this system that I want to include in my, like an economic system, or even
Mm-hmm.
like if they want to include guns, and they want to learn more about guns or military tactics or any of those kinds of things. Something like this, something like a chat GPT can go out, gather that information, aggregate it, present it to you. You can have a conversation and dig deep into certain areas, and it can do a lot of that for you, which beforehand, a lot of anybody writing content would have to go out and get that stuff manually.
Exactly. Yeah. And it takes a lot of time. And so
Mhm.
they're looking at it from the perspective of like, here, I can cut my time down. I could spend, 3 hours doing research and get 10 times as much research as I would have gotten, a year ago without the tool. Right. And so
Mhm.
uh, a lot of people are seeing potential value in different areas. Before I actually hear your results of this, because I know that we want to basically do this podcast mostly on your results of the analysis of ChatGPT. I did dig up some details because last week we didn't have as many details as we wanted about how it actually works, right? And so I wanted to kind of outline a few of those things so that you can hear them as well. So ChatGPT uses historical training data. And as of like January, roughly, when things started to really pick up, people are excited about it. They had about 175 billion parameters or pieces of historical training data. So what you're seeing from the results is basically 175 billion pieces, right? They are expected about 500 billion by 2024 and about a trillion by 2025. When they called it about when they were talking about it as the intelligence of a dolphin, that's what they were
Mhm.
referring to. Is that like from an intelligence perspective, the 175 billion is tied to like roughly how a dolphin thinks or whatever. I mean, they're trying to give something that people have context around, right? So when you get to the
Mhm.
1 trillion, though, by 2025, it should be smarter than us. So it should be able to give us information, ideas, whatever it is, at a higher degree than our level of thinking. What that means, I don't know, but that's just kind of what they're being
Yeah.
that they're
I,
saying about it.
I'm a little skeptical that you can do that with just training. I think it will probably take some kind of adjustments to the back end code for the AI itself in order to advance it that much. I look at stuff like 175 billion, and I think as far as like from a statistical perspective, going from 1.75 billion to 1 trillion doesn't buy you that much more certainty unless it's completely different types of data. Like you're
That's
getting,
what it is. Yeah,
yeah. So
it's
it's less
expanding the
about
data.
the raw number and more about the different types of data that's going in. So if before it was just like, all right, well, it's all about coding, and now we're like, okay, now we're getting data about like current events, or we're getting data about political structures, or something else that's just completely different type of data, then that's something that I think enhances the capabilities of the tool.
Absolutely, yeah. And then digging into what you love to hear about um, is so it doesn't just look at the internet because it always says like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
data is based on the internet of 2021, but it looks at Codex, a coding system that basically teaches the system logic. So it's based on
Mm-hmm.
reasoning at a basic level. So not they're not using the coding just to be able to create code. They're using the
Mm-hmm.
coding as a way of teaching the system logic. So when you ask it a question, it has some basic reasoning skills of like if
Mm-hmm.
then else, you know what I mean? So it says like, oh,
Yeah.
well, Demetrius asked for X, which means he probably would want Y, which means he would probably want Z, and that kind of stuff. So it uses this logic when figuring out what information to present to the user when a question is asked. Some content is nullified by the company, such as information about like building bombs and stuff like that, that could lead down a bad path. So they're trying to control that now. How well they'll be able to do that in the future when this stuff expands like rapidly and largely, I don't know. But they're trying to basically do that. And you and I experienced that because I think I had you ask it a question and it said it was unethical to do it. Um, so basically, we did have a chance to see that in real life, kind of
Yeah,
unfold.
well, I don't believe that it really has internalized ethics or morality. I think it's been programmed to say, like, all right, well, these types of things are going to be out of bounds.
Uh-huh.
So that's the response. But when it comes to using a codex of logic, that's kind of where you go from being just a simple input output machine to more of an actual intelligence. So that's
Yeah.
the intelligence in the artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And
Super cool.
when all this stuff started, when all this AI stuff started, which actually was, what I think in the 70s or 80s, really. But when things started picking up, we were like, what is going to be really important for the development of these things are going to be cognitive scientists and actual philosophers who focus on logic and reasoning, because those are the systems like getting in your inductive and deductive syllogisms and logic trees and those kinds of things
Mhm.
into the system in order for the AI to leverage those in order to evaluate the different data and come to kind of a level of decision making.
Absolutely, yeah. And it doesn't always get things right. And actually, the AI apparently needs to be directed in certain times into certain
Hmm.
directions so that it doesn't go down the wrong path. And for example, what I read was that it's actually using humans in certain situations for ranking of important content as well as pointing the AI. So it's kind of they refer to it as kind of like a reinforcement learning. So
Hmm.
when the AI generates, let's say I say, write this story um, in the tone of Demetrius. And let's say you were like a famous actor or something, right?
I
As
am. How dare you?
how dare you? I know exactly. How do they not know you? Um,
Right.
so when you ask it to do that, it kind of ranks and says, well, Demetrius is funny, he's logical, he's accurate. Let's say they create like a bunch of A, B, C, D, E, F, G's, right? Is
Yeah.
that humans will come in if it doesn't look right, and they'll look at it and say, no, 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 no. Actually, funny is number two, logical is number one. And so they're still kind of doing this in order to help it get it right. And they said that this task of these users doing this and basically inputting this kind of like reinforcement learning process is what's making it feel like a real person is talking to you. And that process is actually quite simple in logic. Like you're like, okay, you just got to
Mhm.
arrange this information, but complicated as you grow the size of the actual data set.
Yeah, I mean that makes total sense. I mean they're modeling. I mean reinforcement learning is basically how humans learn, right?
Yeah.
That's you're presented with a stimuli, you respond to it a certain way, and then it's either reinforced or punished. Reinforcement means that the response that you had to that stimuli um, becomes more. Essentially becomes rewarded, and then you're more likely to respond in the same way in the future. Punished means that you're less likely to, whether that's it's not usually like the way we think about punishment in a normal sense, right? In a non like jargon like sense. It's doesn't have to be unpleasant. It just has to decrease the likelihood of that behavior repeating. So it's kind of the same model they're using for this. Is like, okay, if the AI tries out something and it gets an appropriate response, then it learns that was good. It gets a positive tick, and then it leverages that by repeating it again in the future.
And what's really interesting about this is that, like, how, like, when you'd go in and you ask it a question or something at the very end, it would say, was this good or not good? Or was this information accurate or not accurate? I forgot exactly how they do it, right? Is it a thumbs up or something? But anyways, that information and that data is actually sent back to the system, and they say, oh, okay, well, let's say 10,000 people said that this response was not accurate or not correct. That could go to a human database, and then they can look at it and say, like, oh, yeah, yeah, it's just off a little bit, and then you tweak it, and then suddenly that
Mhm.
10,000 goes down to like one, right? And
Yeah.
so it does take human intervention right now. It's not like the system itself is completely autonomous, but the neural networks that it's built upon and the way in which it actually pulls that information, you know, brings it together, uses its reinforcement learning and everything, is continuing to make the system more and more intelligent. And as it gets more and more intelligent, the amount of human intervention will be reduced.
Yeah.
So,
So one thing before we go move on to the next part, I will say that I want to toot our own horn a little bit because last week when we recorded last week's podcast,
uh-huh.
uh, which was released on the 6th, we predicted that Google was going to have its own
Yeah.
chatbot and that it was already in the works, especially because they invented the underlying technology that ChatGPT uses. They invented transformers, which are the
Mhm.
T in ChatGPT. And then it was literally a day, I believe, based on this news article I'm looking at, it was a day after our prediction went live that Google unveiled Bard. So the reality is they've been working on this for a long time in order for it to get released. It wasn't as though they saw ChatGPT become popular in over the last couple of months and it's like, oh, let's spin this up. They've been working on this for quite a while. And I remember also that that Facebook a few years back were saying that this was going to be a major focus for them. So I wonder if they're going to be able to put out a product also.
I don't know. Facebook's got a lot of data. Like if you think about it, right? Google has all the search data, obviously, in the
They
world,
do.
for the most part. And then you look at the amount of historical social data just
Yeah.
from Facebook, and even Twitter to some extent has, probably a pretty decent sized database of data. But like you look at these big companies, these are going to be the ones that are really going to drive this stuff forward for the most part.
Yeah. Here's the thing, right? I think Google has more actionable data. I think it's easier to take a look at someone's search history or somebody's driving history or somebody's emails and kind of draw conclusions about their preferences. Or even they have smart home data, right, which Facebook doesn't have. The type of data that Facebook has, that kind of interpersonal social data, is much more difficult to analyze and draw meaningful conclusions from, because it's so variable. You don't know what the things are. You don't know in a given person's interaction what the nature of it is, because you need that context. You mostly know, okay, Brian likes surfing. Demetrius likes cats, and they like talking to each other about like funny things, right? Beyond that, it's difficult, very difficult, to draw more complex conclusions. And I don't know how about Facebook's capabilities to kind of break new ground in that area.
Yeah, their focus appears to be on Meta and the metaverse and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't seem like their focus is there. I'm sure they have a team working on it. Imagine if you took their data plus Google's data plus everything that's ever gone through iMessage, right? Can you imagine if you combined all that stuff together and actually started building models on it? It'd be crazy and unstoppable.
Well, that's the thing that I don't think that a lot of people understand, is that like having the data and being able to use it are two different things.
Exactly.
That's why, like, when a lot of the what was it, the question about like the surveillance that's going on.
Yep.
I personally wasn't too concerned, because I was like, the people who are gathering this data, I don't think have the technological capability of doing that much with it. I mean, in the future, it could potentially be a big issue, but I don't know that it's there yet. And it's also a huge challenge, and takes a lot of resources for Twitter just to manage the amount of like text going back and forth, much less photos and video and more complex relationships and things like that. But one of the things that you said about the metaverse, because one of the challenges that people have or companies have when they're developing a metaverse is populating it so that people don't go in there and feel like they're alone.
Yeah.
Now, if you have an AI chatbot that's there waiting for you and is your best friend, then that can become a major component of their metaverse experience.
It's true. I mean, you're going to see all of this unfold because there's already so many companies that are building tools basically as splinters off of the APIs of these different AI systems. So it wouldn't be shocking to me to hear a metaverse company goes, oh, we tapped into the ChatGPT AI or Google AI, and it communicates with you. It's the friend that you're talking to. You don't even realize it's not a real person, right?
Yeah.
At some point. And it could provide the same emotional support. The reality is that if you don't know, if you're not seeing their face and you don't know that they're a real person, but they're providing the same stimulus, the same feelings that you would get when talking to someone else, where they're asking you questions and they care about what you think and they compliment you on your outfits or your avatars or whatever it is, you're going to feel the same way until you realize it's not a real person.
Yeah. I mean, and you can realize that it's not a real person, but you can still kind of connect with it, right? I mean, how many people feel emotionally attached to their phones or their cars or other inanimate objects?
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's jump in here. I'm really curious. Drum roll. Is that you did a deep dive and wanted to give kind of an objective response as someone who's been doing research for 20 years, what you think about this tool at its current state. I mean, it's in its infancy, to be fair. But go ahead, let us know what you think.
All right, yeah. So I held off on getting into ChatGPT both because I figured at some point we were going to do this and we're going to take a look at what my reactions kind of were a little bit kind of in the moment. And also because I was just super busy and went out of town and got stuck in a cabin in the woods with no internet access anyway. So this all kind of came together and I took a look at it. And I think one of the things that kind of affected my evaluation was how effusive all of the praise has been. I think I might have set my expectations a little too high. But I will say that one of the first things that struck me was how good the natural language processing capabilities were. Its ability to understand what I was saying to it, and I tried to trip it up by using some slang, like even like more recent slang that like my mother wouldn't get, or even a few people my own age would be like, "Well, what does that mean?"
Yeah.
And I understood it, and it responded well. Like it didn't ask for clarification; it just understood and responded it. So as far as understanding speech, it's actually I think very capable. And I think that's where the advances primarily are. Um, on the other side of things, I feel like one of the things that's currently limiting it is it doesn't have access to live data, and that limits the practical use of it. So, like for example, I asked it. I figured, okay, maybe this can help me with travel. So I asked it for an itinerary of events. I was going to Hawaii, and for a hypothetical trip to Hawaii. I wish I had time to go to Hawaii. But I said, give me an itinerary for these 5 days in Hawaii if I was able to go. And it actually gave me some good information, right? And I've been to Hawaii enough, plenty of times in my life, that I know kind of where things are and what to do. And it provided some good stuff, especially for somebody who is going there for the first time. And it was able to like take into account their location. Like for example, it said like, oh, go to the North Shore and spend a day watching the surfers or hitting the beach, get some food, and then on your way back, you can hit the Dole Plantation. Well, anybody who knows Oahu knows, okay, well, those two are in the same place. It's not telling me to go to the USS Arizona and then go out to Kaneohe or something like that.
That's pretty good, and that's pretty good, D. Like
Mhm.
that's a minor detail that I think a lot of these systems would forget at this point.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, if you went to like a TripAdvisor or something, it wouldn't necessarily do that. You might be able to
Yeah.
like drill down and say like, give me things to do within this area, but you couldn't just ask, okay, for the entire island, generate for me a, a bunch of activities, and it wouldn't be able to take those into account at this point in that way. So I thought that was really good. The other thing was one of the things that really like planning the trip like that is always kind of a pain point, especially if you're coordinating multiple people and things like that. So it was just like, tell me about flights to Hawaii. Tell me some good flights to Hawaii in these time frames. And he said, oh, I don't have access to that data. So that is an area where I feel like that would be huge utility if I could just like, pick an Airbnb or a hotel and flights and times and car rental and all those kinds of things through one interface. It picks them for me based on some constraints that I give it, and then I just have to approve them, and it books my card. But that use case isn't available right now because it doesn't have access to live data. So once I understood, because I don't feel like it told me up front that it didn't have access to live data, I was like, okay, I need to shift to my thinking. There's a limitation here that I wasn't aware of. So now a lot of the things that I was thinking about as far as like, oh, get me, sports scores or some kind of like, all right, what's going on with the war in Ukraine, those kinds of things, those are all off the table. And I started thinking of, okay, what can I do with this that I can't do with Google? So I asked it to create a guitar tab for me
Mhm.
for I think it was Redemption Song by Bob Marley. It's a song that I know, so I know what the tabs are supposed to look like. And it generated a guitar tab, but it was incorrect. It couldn't really produce real melodies. Like the melody was off. It told me the chords also the chords were wrong. It was on the wrong key, and it was only able to really give me one bar of a tab. So as far as right now, I assume I don't know for sure, but I assume that they're going to continue to develop that capability so that it will provide you like an entire guitar tab. That is actually a really cool capability when it gets there because there's plenty of like you know, there's plenty of guitar music out there that's in the public domain that it can say like, okay, here's "Oh Susanna" or some of these songs from like history that you can now kind of get, you can source as opposed to going out looking for them. I had to do the same thing with music notation for like sheet music, and it wasn't able to do that. It says that it's difficult to do in a text format. It's not really. You could, but it didn't try to. So to me, that just said, okay, well, it's not programmed for that yet.
Yeah. And that's pretty complicated, to be fair. Like, I mean, you're asking it to do something, which is awesome because you wanted to push it as much as you could. I didn't even think to ask it for like music related stuff like that. But it's
Yeah.
cool that it did something, like it tried. Or
Well, there's software out there that can take humans can do this where they can not me, but more advanced musical humans can listen to a song and say, okay, those are the notes, that's the rhythm, these are the chords, and I'm going to write it out. I'm going to transpose it. That's one of the things. If one of us were to go get a musical degree, then that would be like some of our homework. We'd be like, all right, take this song and transpose it, write it into musical notation. So that's something that it can't currently do. It could also do kind of the aggregator thing. That would be the other option if I were like developing this, if I was working on this. I'd like go out there and find some musical notation for this song. Maybe it's I don't know, Beethoven's 29th symphony or something like that, or sonata, and write it up for me. And one of the things you'll find is that not every version of the sheet music that's out there floating around on the internet is going to be the same. So we would have to kind of figure out, which one is the right one, or do I compile some of these by comparing them and seeing how many of them agree. So that would be kind of a pretty interesting use case. Beyond that, I got to the point where actually, because people were saying that it was good at generating content, I asked it to write a haiku. Mm-hmm. I said, write me a haiku about Eminem, right? The rap. Because Eminem's a fantastic lyricist, and I think he's basically a poet. So it wrote a haiku, but it got the number of syllables wrong. This is one of the things where I was like, oh yeah, Google AI, their chatbot got things wrong. I'm like, well, honestly, ChatGPT got quite a few things wrong, and I'll kind of talk about some of them. It was not able to identify that Eminem was 3 syllables. It treated it as 1. So the second line where it used the word Eminem, it treated it as 1 syllable, so there are too many syllables in that line. Which I imagine that's something that it'll eventually learn.
Yeah. Do you see this stuff as like just like the very beginning of like stuff that's going to be easily worked out? Do you know what I mean? Do you look at it and go like, yeah, of course. I mean, they just released it in public.
Well, here's the thing. I do think it is the very beginning. I do not think it's going to be easily worked out. I think most of these are difficult things to do. Now, the Eminem thing with the haiku, that's something that it should be relatively easy to figure out, but it's having difficulty. It was able, though, to recognize that Eminem was a rapper because when it generated the haiku, it had the whole references to him, creating rhymes and beats and things like that. But it wasn't able to recognize that Eminem was 3 syllables and incorporate that into the haiku. So it's reasonably close. That is recognizing that word has that many syllables is something that could be figured out. I don't know. Ideally, what you would want it to do is be able to like use natural language processing to count the syllables in it, as opposed to somebody going in and creating a lexicon in which there's a table in which every word has its own number of syllables. Which is probably how it's done now. And that's why it had a difficult time recognizing that it was 3 syllables, because that word, that proper name, wasn't in its lexicon that was pre-programmed. So adding things dynamically to the lexicon is something that I don't think it can do currently. So there were some other limitations I ran into. I messaged you yesterday. I was like, I'm having a hard time finding things that it can do correctly, because my task was to try to push it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I was trying to think of things that would not just be a Google search. And then I tried something that would be a Google search. So I asked it to give me a list of all the Michelin stars in the Bay Area, with their star rating. So number one, it took me like it took me 10 minutes to to formulate the query in a way in which it would agree to answer it. For the most part, like a few times it was like, oh, I don't have the lightest data, so I'm not going to answer that. So I'm like, that's not from a user experience perspective. I'm like, just don't tell me no. Tell me like, no, but here's what I can give you.
Yeah.
Or something. And it kind of does. It tells you to go look it up. But that's not what I want to do. I don't want to go leave your experience and go look it up. That's just bad design, right? You want to say like, all right, well, here's something. So because it had limited data, I had to reformulate to say as of 2020, which is when you had good data. So then I was able to put out 15 of them. And it didn't mention their star rating. It just had a list of 15 restaurants. And for the most part, they're the 15 restaurants that everybody kind of knows, like Benu or State Bird Provisions and things like that. So I was like, give me the complete list. And it was like, no. And I was like, it's not that hard. Give me the complete list with star rating. Just put out a little chart here that says, Atelier Cran 3 stars or Manresa 3 stars. Like, and it wouldn't do it. It was just like, nope, you're getting your 15 and that's it. So like, all right, well, Google could do that. So, all right, so that's a limitation. Overall, the other thing I tried to do after that, I was like, okay, it's telling me it can have a conversation. So let's have a conversation about the Super Bowl coming up. As of the time we're recording this, by the time it's published, it'll be out, and I'm sure either Philadelphia will be happy or Kansas City will. And I asked it, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? And as opposed to going in the conversation mode, which if I asked a human that question, they would recognize, oh, he's trying to get into he's starting to bring up a topic of conversation. I'm going into conversation mode. It failed to recognize that and just, I think, went into like, here's what legal allows me to say. And it said, I do not have the capabilities of making predictions about future events. And I was just like, man, I'm trying to have a conversation.
Well, that makes a really good point, because when it comes to communicating with AI, we as humans have good triggers that we understand. Where you say like, who do you think? If you ask me, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? I don't have insights into who's going to win, but I have an opinion. And you're asking basically AI to give you an opinion on something. And it sounds like it didn't want to.
Well, if I was designing this as a product experience, right, it would say, he asked me who I think, not predict.
Yes.
So that is more of like, give me your opinion, not a statistical analysis of the different play style and predictions in order to give me betting odds or something. It had difficulty with that. And overall, I think this is like, it's kind of what we said last week. This is not a product. This is a technology demonstration. And I think more than that, it is a way for them to source use cases from the public, because they don't know what the use cases are, or they probably have an idea of some use cases, but they don't have a really exhaustive use case.
It almost feels
list of use cases.
It almost feels like this is just the back-end technology, and that every company in the world who wants to use it for their specific purpose or their specific use case would eventually just tie into this technology.
Yeah, so it feels like a back-end technology right now to me. Like it doesn't feel like it's productized. So we talked about this offline, but if I was developing this kind of system, if we were working on this from a product perspective, you always want to tell people, this is what this is for. Not what this can do, but this is what this is for, this product. And then the technology can be repurposed into multiple things. So you can have a version of this that is a news aggregator, and it's given a name that communicates that it's for news. And up front, when you first get into the app, it tells you like, this is what this is for. This is for going out and collecting news for you and presenting it to you in a very readable and informed way that balances both sides and whatever parameters they decide is important. If it's a content generator for marketers, right, it's given a name that communicates that. It's given, when you first enter into the experience, it kind of it solidifies that with imagery and with text and everything else. Like, this is what this is for. Right now, it reminds me of when voice systems first came out,
Mhm.
and all of kind of the marketing around it was like, oh, it can do this, it can do that, it can do this, and it can do that, and you end up in like this tyranny of choice, analysis paralysis of like, it can do all these things, but what do I do it for? And
Yeah.
I felt like when I was starting to use this, I was like, I spent all my time trying to figure out what I was going to use it for, and you just can't do that for a technology. That's fine because it's all going to get figured out. But in order for it to have a finished product, you can't ask your users, the people, to do that work for you. You tell them this is what this is for, and maybe they uncover additional things that you can then develop into the product experience because the technology supports it.
That's why the CEO of ChatGPT, Sam Altman, I think is really smart because he could have taken this thing and said, "No, we're just going to run with it the way it is and make it,
Mhm.
make it a tool that people pay $20 a month for, or whatever it is." And instead, he was like, "Everyone's going to catch up with me. I need to make a massive partnership." And then he connected with Microsoft, and Microsoft is integrating this entire technology into Bing, right? And
Mhm.
I feel like that's the first productization of it. Like it's going to be part of search. It's going to be part of their whole experience. And something
Yeah.
that happened actually over the last couple of days is they said there was a 10x increase in the number of downloads of Bing
Mhm.
from the Apple App Store. And
So.
so there's that already kind of unfolding, and he's like, "I wanna get this
Mhm.
into a product. I want it to" exactly what you said, "I want it to be a product." Yeah, there's probably be a million use cases for it that
Mhm.
other people will use, in certain companies, industries, applications. But, like, for the most part, the big swing is with search.
Yeah. So I looked at this and thought to myself, well, this is not Microsoft. This is not Google. They don't have the data. They kind of had to do this kind of release in order to get the usage data and understand, all right, what are people asking for it to do? What are people, if it was me, if they're listening to this, what I would say when you're looking at your data, don't just look at people who are asking for the application to do, but what increases engagement around the topic.
Mhm.
So um, if somebody asks one thing and then walks away from it, then that's it's good to know that they asked it. But if they stay on topic and continue to ask different related questions, then that's where people are either you have to look at it a little bit and try to understand if they had like if they're are they doing it because of like my Michelin starter example where I just can't get the the data that I'm looking for and I'm walking away frustrated,
Mhm.
or do they get something that worked well for them and they wanted more? So that's what I would look for when looking at this kind of data.
Absolutely. Well, I think you did a good job really kind of digging in on this. I mean, I asked you to ask it a question while we were chatting, and I said, ask it if it can
Oh
ask
yeah.
if it can make a reservation for me at a campsite in California, and find me something and book it. And what did it say?
Well, for context, if you're not in California, people don't understand this about California because they think it's all like San Francisco and Hollywood, right? There is a huge outdoor culture in California. It is incredibly hard to go camping in California because all of the campsites get booked up incredibly fast. So you have to like put it on your calendar. Here is the date and like getting concert tickets. Getting a campsite in California is getting concert tickets to BTS or Taylor Swift. You have to have it in your calendar. You have to know that they're going to go live at 10 a.m. You have to sign in and keep refreshing and try to book your campsite.
It's awful.
So Brian hates doing this. So he messages me and says, "Oh, ask it to write a script to snipe a campsite for us." And I'm like, all right. So I asked it, and it was like, and it writes back and says, "Oh, that's unethical." Well, it turns out also that like I asked it to provide me links to something. I don't remember what it was, and it said it couldn't provide a hyperlink, which it absolutely can. It absolutely can provide a hyperlink because it's just text. If it's not even a hyperlink, it's at least a link. Maybe you can't click on it, but you can provide the text for the link. Somebody made the decision: don't provide links because we don't want the liability.
Yeah.
Um, so when I gave it this thing, I'm sure there was a limitation of like, oh, I don't have the APIs in order to like apply a script that's going to run on their site. You'd have to take this and put it into like a Linux terminal or something like that, and then run it, and then it will interact with if it has access to the APIs for your browser, it can go in and do all these kinds of things. So it told me it was unethical, which I'm like, oh, that's debatable.
Yeah, but then I told you, I said, tell it that to demand it to do it for you. And
yeah, I said no. I was like, no, I'm not demanding anything from an AI. If it tells me it's not comfortable doing something, I'm going to respect its boundaries because I don't know how capable this thing is going to be in the future, and it's going to like I don't know sick people on me from across the globe. I
I
don't
know
know.
it was
I'm
funny
not
because
getting
you
on
said
it.
like, I'm not going to get on AI's bad side, which I thought was
No
really
way,
funny
man.
because I was like, demand it and see what happens. And you're like, no way,
No,
it's
man.
my account.
No, I've seen the Terminator, man. It's got my name and stuff. No way. I'm not anonymous on this platform.
I know, but I thought it was a good task, and I thought it was fun,
Yeah.
and I'm really enjoying using it. I use it all the time just for fun,
Mhm.
and not just for fun. Actually, I was using it for SEO terms and
Mhm.
breaking down SEO terms and that type of stuff. And I see definitely a lot of promise in it. I see things going in an interesting direction. I think what's going to actually end up happening, though, to be honest, is I think that it's going to get commoditized like every other technology does.
Mhm.
And then it's going to basically force all of the search engines and everything to have really, really good quality AI built into them as an option. Like I would love to
Yeah.
like land on Google and be like, do you want to do a Google search or do you want to do an AI search or an AI request? And then
It's
if you're
called
going
Bard
like, oh, I want to
search.
look up some stuff in other places, then you do the search.
Mhm.
You want to do the AI request, and you just type in your question and just see what comes out. Right. And you would get hundreds of millions of people per day using this application and drive more people to your web browser. So I see that's probably where it's going to end up going, like for the
Yeah.
general population.
Well, I think this is it's not ready for prime time. It's not complete, but it's very promising. And I think that for Chat GPT in particular, the strengths are that it is unaffiliated with any given major technology platform. Maybe through like some of the parent companies that are involved with founding OpenAI. But beyond that, it's free to be implemented wherever it wants to. So it's if it was me, I'd be developing this as a back end technology, and I'd be forming business B2B relationships with companies like Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon in order to drive their existing systems like Bing or Alexa or any of those kinds of things because its natural language processing is very, very good. Um, where I think I see a weakness for this is this company does not have the data needed in order to get this to its final form. Um, and I don't know if the relationship with Microsoft and Bing that Microsoft is going to be willing to provide that data to them in order for them to fully enhance the system. I don't know if OpenAI is going to provide the development tools enough to Microsoft in order for Microsoft to use the data.
Well, it
And
kind of
then even
reminds me a
then,
little bit. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Amazon in the sense of like if you look at Alexa, right? Amazon doesn't have the data that Google has of internet,
no.
right? So it's basically borrowing it or cataloging it. I'm not exactly sure how it's doing it, but it's not actually getting it directly sourced the way that Google would.
So
Um,
it's using AI in order, or not AI. It's using APIs in order to get some of the data. So whatever is available to them through whatever the API will provide to them is made available to any system that wants to use it.
mhm.
It's not going to be the same as like Google actually developing it and having their own internal APIs in order to source that kind of data. Uh, and we kind of saw with Alexa kind of how some of those limitations have resulted in some struggles for them. Um, so I think that's one of the things that ChatGPT as a platform is going to have to overcome is how do I get access to the data in order to enable some of these practical applications, such as finding flights and rental cars and Airbnbs for Demetrius on his trip to Hawaii.
Exactly. No, this was awesome, dude. I'm glad you had a chance to deep dive and do this. I think our listeners are going to appreciate all of your thoughts on them, and we'll be talking about this more. I mean, because it's just starting right now to unfold, and I think there's going to be a lot of news about this over the course of the year. But I think this is a good place to stop for today, and we'll kind of pick up next week. I wanted to thank everyone very much for taking the time to listen to us today. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned last week and at the end of the year, before we started season 7, we will now be posting all updates as well as our video versions of our podcast on YouTube at the X Podcast. We have been getting them uploaded and we're starting to catalog. We're starting to pull things together. So if you can go to the YouTube page and subscribe to our channel, that would be super cool and we'd appreciate it. Also, if you like this podcast and found it interesting or informative, please subscribe or leave a review on whatever podcast platform you use so we can continue to do this every week. We love it. And so thank you all, everyone, and we will see you all next week.